So my name, good evening, welcome to Hackney's Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Vincent Stopps and I shall be chairing this evening's meeting. The council will be recording this meeting and it's being live streamed on YouTube. We're now back to meeting in person and councillors voting this evening are all here in the chamber. We'll be undertaking the meeting in as close a fashion as we can to our normal format. Some officers are taking part remotely to allow social distancing in the chamber. Just to tell you, the virtual meeting technology has a chat function. Please don't use it for anything other than technology related issues. Can I firstly introduce members? Councillors Hanson, Councillor Young, Councillor Potter and Councillor Bell. We've had the head of planning, Natalie, on my left, our legal advisor out of shot, Christine, on my left, and Gareth here, who some of you will have spoken to on my right. And there are planning and design and transport officers using the conference facility today to advise us. There are objectors and applicants here, some in person, but I think they're all in person, one person in objection this evening. Before moving to the agenda, I'll take a couple of minutes to explain how the meeting will proceed. We'll hear each application summarised by the officers and a 5-minute statement from the objectors, followed by a 5-minute statement from the applicant. Members will then be free to ask questions. It's my role as chair to make sure members have all the information they need to make a decision, objectors and applicants have their say, and that the meeting runs properly. I'll not be taking any contribution from the floor. This is a meeting in public and not a public meeting, and you must have given notice to Gareth before the meeting to register to speak. As I've said, you have 5 minutes to speak. Members are not representing either their wards nor their political parties. We make our decisions on the basis of any site visits we may have made, what we have read in the reports, and of course what we hear this evening. We must only take account of policies adopted by this council, other material planning policies and material planning considerations. Can I emphasise that members should not discuss nor take account of non-material planning matters? Members making the decision should not have allowed themselves to prejudge any application prior to the meeting. Similarly, if they have any interest in the application site or all the people involved, they should declare that interest and may remove themselves from the decision. When we've finished our deliberation, we'll vote on the recommendation. When the decision is made, that's the end of the matter for the committee. The applicant may appeal our decision to Secretary of State and objectors may seek legal redress. I'd advise you to seek professional advice in either case. Finally, we'd normally be taking a break, but I'm hoping we'll be able to work straight through, and we'll move to the agenda. So first of all, we have apologies for absence, please.
Chair, apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Joseph, Councillor Levy and Councillor Race. I believe Councillor Garcia may be joining us virtually by the technology.
That's just to observe.
Just to observe, yes.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Potter, for substituting on behalf of one of those, I'm not sure which. Declarations of interest, are there any? There are not. We haven't any proposals from the council's monitoring officer, and we have minutes of the previous meeting. Any issues for that previous meeting, please? So a long time ago. Yes, I don't know how it slipped through the.
There's a bit of a backlog. I believe this is the last sort of historic minutes now, and we should be fairly up to date from here on in.
Apologies. So you're happy whenever we get around to actually signing these things, that I can sign them as a representation of what happened back in July. Next up is that I have actually, once in a blue moon, I don't think you can remember me actually changing the order of service, but we are going to change because we've got a very short item. I think it'll be a very short item with no objector here this evening, the Purcell Street one, which we've actually seen before. So I've flipped that to the top of the agenda, and hopefully that will go pretty swiftly. So we're going to do 1 to 10 Purcell Street first, and that's over to James, please.
Good evening, councillors. Can you hear me all? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is 1 to 10 Purcell Street. This is at the junction with Pitfield Street, just to the south. Like you said, we've already dealt with a similar application on this site. It was for the replacement of windows. This is a similar proposal, but instead of just replacing the windows, it will also be replacing the paneling below the windows, as well as the doors that lead onto the balconies and the communal windows that are in the staircase. So essentially, it's a very similar application to what we've had before on the previous site. It's also similar to one that was recently dealt with by committee. I think at the last agenda it was one of Danny Huber's applications. In fact, it's identical to that one. It should be noted that you can see on the surrounding context there are three of the blocks just behind this one, which are again plan permission for essentially an identical proposal has been granted on all of these blocks already. So this is there's a very strong established precedent for this sort of work in the area already. And as you can see in the sort of surrounding area, it's sort of a mixed typology of buildings with varying different styles of building, most of them modern with mainly varying types of windows that already exist. The reason for this case being taken to committee is again because it's the council's own application, and we've received 2 objections from 2 of the residents in the block objecting to the works. Among the objections they've submitted, the most material are the objections to sort of replacement with the timber windows with plastic, and concerns that like the existing windows are already of sufficient quality and don't need to be replaced, as well as concerns have been made over the consultation. I believe initially due to a clerical error, the letters weren't sent out, the neighbours' letters weren't sent out, which is why this case wasn't taken to the previous committee. It had to be delayed, so in order to send those letters out. But now that has been done, the consultation period is fully complete. Other concerns raised have mainly been related to sort of non-material issues. Other than that, there's been concerns about fire risk, which again is more building control concern. Is concerned that the plastic windows, UPVC windows, are more subject to fire risk, which is a non-material concern. Concern that the works aren't needed in the existing windows and good repair, and concern about cost for residents. Again, this is sort of assessing the proposal based on its own merits rather than sort of the necessary need for the works. And also, concerns about constructions as well, and potential concerns relating to that. But again, the construction works aren't necessarily, or concerns around construction works aren't to do with the plan application. So in terms of this application, we've recommended it for approval, partly because of the design. We think there's already a strong established precedent in the area based upon what's been approved on the site already and in the surrounding areas. Also, the building itself is of a modern design, and the proposal will essentially replace the existing timber windows with UPVC. We don't believe that change in materials is detrimental to the character of the building due to its modern appearance and also the typology of the area, what's already been approved, and the existing windows. The proposal will also vary slightly in colour. It's from brown to rose red, but we believe that rosewood is sufficiently similar to the existing colour for it to be acceptable. There's concerns. The proposal relates to also replace the paneling and doors. We haven't got quite enough details to make a full assessment on that. So as part of this, we've decided to attach a condition, recommending the discharge of condition for those details to be provided at a later date. We already have we attached a similar condition on a previous application, which when those details were provided, that was approved. So I imagine that would also be acceptable in this case as well when they do provide those details. In regards to sort of from a design perspective, we have no issue with this. In terms of neighbouring amenity, there are no neighbouring amenity impacts with this. It's just replacement of the windows and paneling and doors, so there'll be no loss of light, outlook, or privacy for surrounding dwellings. And in terms of the standard of accommodation, it will be an improvement, as it will be increasing the thickness of the typical glazing, thereby improving the thermal performance, and also improving the security of the site as well. So that is why we've essentially recommended this proposal for approval.
Sorry, I only have one point. We've got reason for referral to the planning committee. We've got a set of boxes. Somewhere it should say that it's a Hackney application. if we can do that in the future. Are there any questions, members? Sarah?
I know we've seen this before, and I perhaps should have asked this on a previous occasion, but having just been doing some work with sustainability strategies, I did wonder how UPVC fits in with the council's sustainability strategy. And also, it's just been pointed out to me that one of the kind of little planning apps that didn't come to the council to change timber windows to UPVC windows has been turned down. So I just wondered whether I suspect that's in a conservation area. It's in Eleanor Road in E8. I just wondered whether we're taking a different approach to our own council buildings than we're taking to individual Victorian houses, and why.
Okay, so we're talking about this application, not applications in the generality. But James, if you can tell us something about that, then please. I can't hear you, James. Unmute.
Sorry about that. Sorry, Councillor. Yeah, in terms of sustainability, we weren't concerned that consider the existing sort of timber windows. Well, the existing timber windows are acceptable in terms of the appearance, but in terms of like UPVC windows, we have approved similar UPVC windows on surrounding sites already, and we have approved yeah, again, like we wouldn't normally approve such UPVC windows inside a conservation area. This isn't located in a conservation area, so potentially that other site was refused because it wasn't in a conservation area. In regards to the actual sort of sustainability of the windows, these windows, when maintained, do last for a long period of time, and therefore they will provide a sort of long-term use that is acceptable in our opinion.
I think you've got to have that debate with the housing department, not the planning department, Councillor Young. Claire? Well, you'll need to support have a go at the housing department about their attitude to timber versus, and it would be useful. We've got a quantity surveyor here. Do meet with the officers, but I think we've heard enough in terms of making a decision on this particular proposal. Okay? Or do you want to pursue it? That's a good question. Please switch your microphone on.
We certainly did. It was roughly 2 to 3 times the cost, renewing in timber as opposed to UPVC. So I understand the comments, but I think if you renew windows, timber windows, it's more likely to be to a street property, to the beautiful terrace houses that you've got, as opposed to a block that needs renewal. They're at the end of their life. We looked into it, but at the end of the day, you've got such a housing stock and a finite amount of money. We would like to renew in timber, but funds dictate.
Your colleague wants to have a...
In addition to what you just said, we look at like the ongoing maintenance costs as well. We need to like put scaffolding frequently to like maintain timber windows. So we thought the best approach is to like replace like a PVC to match what we currently have as close as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Potter. Microphone, Councillor. We can't hear you. Nobody can hear you.
Sorry, I'd just like to make the point that the claims for UPVC, just from experience that I've had, is never as great as what is claimed. And actually timber, in terms of a long-term proposition, is much more cost effective in terms of the knowledge, the general knowledge that I have. But I just want to make that point.
Thank you. And I think you should make it outside of this. Please talk to them. We've been making this point for years, I think. Okay, so we have a proposal recommendation, and it's to grant planning permission subject to conditions. All those in favour, please show. That's all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I wonder if you would meet with my 2 colleagues and thrash that out with them. That would be really useful. Thank you. Sorry, move on to Haggerston Bath. So objector, please. If you could come and sit over here. If you could come and sit on this closest one to me, that would be uncontaminated. A clean, next to it. That would be good. Thank you very much indeed. The model, we'll go and have a look at it in a minute. We haven't got a table, it's a huge table, so we're going to have to go and have a look at the model. Okay, so without further ado, over to Nick, I think it is. Nick, please.
That's correct. Can you see that?
Yes, share the screen. Oh.
(2021) 2491 is an application for the building known as Haggerston Baths. You're also asked to consider 2021 2495, the associated listed building consent. The site is bounded by Laburnum Street to the north and Whiston Road to the south. It contains a Grade 2 listed building formerly in use as a public swimming pool, with ancillary uses such as baths and a laundry. The site borders the Regent's Canal Conservation Area across Laburnum Street to the north. It's also within the setting of the Hackney Road Conservation Area across Whiston Road and Queensbridge Roads in the southeast. The application follows a consultation process to find a new use for a disused Grade 2 listed building that was last used in 2000, which ended with Castleforge selected as the preferred bidder in 2017. The building is included in the Historic England Heritage at Risk Register 2021 and has been on the register since at least 2014. The application proposes demolition of the western part of the building to allow the erection of a new office wing of 6 stories, the top 3 stories of which would be set back. In this view, the 6th floor can barely be seen. This view allows for better appreciation of the massing of the top floor, which is well set back from the street-facing elevation. In addition to the offices in the new western wing, the proposal involves a refurbishment of the listed building to provide a flexible community use and event space in the former pool hall here, basement maker spaces here, a separate community hall here, and a gym here. The plans clarify the arrangement. Standard office floor space is shown in this blue. Co-working space is shown in this blue. The basement maker spaces are shown here. The green shows the gym and yoga space at basement level. The light blue circulation space leads to the flexible community and event space in the pool. The cafe is provided at ground floor facing Whiston Road here. A separate ground floor community use floor space is shown here. Further co-working desks are provided around the top of the main hall mezzanine. The second floor here, the women's slipper bars are retained, but with the help of removable wooden boards, the bars are turned into co-working desks. And the upper floors show the massing of the new western wing and its use as office floor space. 530 square meters of discounted workspace would be provided, which would be leased at 80% of market rate and captured within the legal agreement. This discount does not meet the threshold for affordable workspace under the new local plan, which reflects that the proposals were drawn up prior to the cyber attack and prior to the plan. The constraints of the listed building and its renovation are noted, and the proposed discount is considered acceptable in this instance. The condition of the building is deteriorating, and asbestos contamination has left the basement inaccessible. Given these circumstances, it's recognised that the repair of the building will involve significant costs. And in the 20 years that the building has been shuttered, it's not been possible to find any operator who would be able to reopen the facility as a swimming pool. In the meantime, the Britannia Leisure Centre swimming pools have opened nearby. The proposal provides an imaginative mix of uses with the potential to become a community hub, providing events within the large volume of the pool hall to draw users in. The proposed condition would ensure that the use of the pool hall is accessible by members of the public at least 5 days of every week. And as is laid out in the committee report, all of the proposed uses are considered acceptable in principle. In conservation terms, the repair and reuse of this listed building is a considerable public benefit. This image shows the proposed pool hall. Less visible than perhaps it might be when constructed, a 2-story glass enclosure is shown in part of what was space for the swimming pool itself. Precedent photographs for this construction are shown on the left. This axonometric shows the heritage significance of parts of the building. The sawtooth roof part of the building shown in orange is a post-war addition that's to be demolished. The light blue area adjacent to this is original and would also be demolished. It's accepted that the demolition of this original part of the building would cause harm. But these areas are of lower status and have been repeatedly altered to facilitate the changing use of the bars over time, removing much of their original character. The first floor area and roof are in particularly poor condition with serious structural issues. As such, this demolition is considered to cause less than substantial harm. 3 elements of the basement level plant would be removed prior to demolition and placed within the reception area of Swimmers Lane, including a front section of one of the enormous boilers, where they will be permanently displayed. The restoration of the retained parts of the building is a heritage benefit which weighs heavily in favour of the scheme as a public benefit. Nevertheless, extensive conditions are proposed to ensure that the scheme is carried out in a manner that befits the listed building. The south elevation of the scheme shows a retained frontage. In 2 dimensions, the top story is pronounced. However, in 3 dimensions, the visibility of this setback top story is much reduced. We note that the viability work undertaken by the applicant has provided additional information in relation to the impacts to the scheme of the removal of this top story. Overall, the less than substantial harm it would cause to the listed building is balanced against the restoration and reuse of the building and found to be acceptable. More generally, the proposed western elevation is considered to be slightly too tall for its context. It's insufficiently subsidiary to the host historic building since it slightly challenges the building in its visual relationship with the retained chimney and the ridgeline of the pool hall and front block. Again, the harm is considered to be less than substantial and the public benefits of the proposal to balance acceptably against the harm. Aside from the height, the western wing is considered to respond well to the existing building in its context. The design is muted in manner of red brick like the host building, with the use of grey metal to the upper floors as a reference to the large historic water tank. The proposed new double height entrance in Swimmers Lane provides a positive and striking feature to the west elevation. In amenity terms, the closest relationship between the site and neighbouring residential windows is across Swimmers Lane to the west. When these modern blocks were approved, it was recognised that Swimmers Lane would regain its post-war importance as a main entrance to the building if any redevelopment of the proposal site were to occur, and the lane was designed accordingly. Objections to the proposal on amenity grounds have focused on the relationship between these existing buildings and the proposed office use. But officers consider that the distance between proposed and existing windows, which varies from 13 to 15 metres along the lane, represents an acceptable degree of overlooking, not untypical of the urban grain in an inner London location. In daylight and sunlight terms, a report has been submitted that demonstrates that the retained levels of both daylight and sunlight should be considered acceptable. This is fully assessed in the committee report. This section shows how the proposed height of the development is only marginally above that of the facing apartment blocks of Swimmers Lane, aside from the top story, which is so set back as to be only of marginal importance in amenity terms. There are significant impacts to the daylight of the Swimmers Lane apartment blocks, but these are exacerbated by the existing balconies on those buildings. The windows where there are no balconies, the retained VSE is in the mid-teens, which is considered acceptable in this location. In these and other respects, the amenity impact of the proposal is found to be acceptable. Delivery, servicing and waste collection would take place on Laburnham Street using 2 rear entrances. Cycle parking would also be accessed from the rear and is contained within the basement here. The cycle parking falls short of policy target levels, but this is understood given the constraints of the listed building, and Highways money has been secured to convert 2 parking bays on Laburnham Street and Wiston Road to provide further cycle parking. 34 visitor cycle parking spaces would be created within the red line boundary here on Swimmers Lane. This would replace 20 existing cycle spaces on Swimmers Lane. 2 blue badge parking bays will be provided on the public highway within 50 metres of the site and prior to occupation. Room is limited on the site for landscaping, but a net gain to biodiversity is proposed, including green roofs and bird and bat bricks and boxes. Air source heat pumps will be installed and a carbon offsets payment is proposed. The development is considered acceptable in respect of biodiversity and sustainability. So to conclude, the proposed application is considered to be policy compliant. It would bring back into use a highly visible Grade 2 listed building on the Heritage at Risk Register and provide both employment and a high-quality community hub in the restored main hall. These public benefits are considered to balance favourably against the less than substantial harm that the development called the listed building. As is detailed in the committee report, in these and other respects, the scheme is considered acceptable. It's recommended for approval subject to a number of very detailed conditions and the legal agreement.
Thank you. Just before we go on, this again, there's a reasons for referral to the planning subcommittee. We need to say it's a Hackney scheme effectively, or at least the Hackney has an interest in this scheme. Mr. O'Neill, please, 5 minutes.
Good evening, Chair, councillors. I'm here speaking to you on behalf of the residents of the London Mills and Basin Mills apartments, which face the full extent of the 20-metre high office extension from across Swimmers Lane, which is just over 10 metres away. Residents are concerned at the impact of the proposals that have been recommended to you by your officers, and rightly so. As you can imagine, many of them now work from home, and when moving into a flat opposite a listed building, had a legitimate expectation that their outlook wouldn't change significantly. Their concern is that the replacement Western extension is too big, and they're not alone in this. The Hackney Society are of the same view, so the Victorian Society and the council's own urban design officer as well. That's paragraph 6.4.30 of your officer's report. This report sweeps up a wide range of legitimate planning concerns: light, privacy, overlooking, sense of enclosure, and argues that this is the only way that this listed building can be brought back into use. Make no mistake, this is an enabling development case that's being put forward today. You're being asked to prioritise these proposals over the amenity of your residents. I can see that this is a sensitive issue by virtue of the number of people that both the council and the applicant have brought along this evening to address viability issues. From the residents' perspective, they're concerned that the top 2 floors of the office space on the roof, but the balance of the scheme is generally welcomed. 1 floor of roof extension they could probably accept, but the additional space added to the roof in the current scheme exponentially increases the adverse effects on their quality of life. Essentially, the scheme upon which the council based their development agreement with the applicant in 2017 would be acceptable. It was widely publicised at the time. It was based on a heritage assessment your officers prepared, and then reference to that in paragraph 6.4.9 of your report. It seems that everyone was happy with that scheme. Both the council and the applicant signed up to it, so presumably it was viable at the time. The residents, amenity groups, heritage specialists were happy with it as well, but that scheme was 2 floors lower. As a way of demonstrating what the problem is from the perspective of residents in the time that I've got available, I wanted to find a paragraph in your officer's report which clearly set out the impact of the proposals on the living conditions for residents in Basin Mills and London Mills apartments. My intention was to read it out to you this evening so that it would be fresh in your mind when you make your decision. And you can do that with a full understanding of what you're approving and the effect it'll have on local residents. Unfortunately, such a paragraph doesn't exist. It isn't in your officer's report. What there is 10 paragraphs of reasons why the BRE guidelines aren't met or don't need to be met in this instance. I don't have time to run you through them. I'm sure you've heard them all before, but maybe not all together in a single application, as applications involving this many failures against BRE guidelines don't tend to make it as far as committee without amendment. They tend to be refused under delegated powers. But to correct the omission in the officer's report, the headline position is this: 40 windows were tested in Basin Mills, 52.5% of those failed the BRE's VSC test. In London Mills, 45 windows were tested, 38% of those windows failed the test. I would urge you to clarify this assessment with your own planning officers, and I'd be interested to see if they can do it without having to revert to the applicant's own specialists who are here, I think, to assist. This many failures isn't usual for dense urban areas. It's not a failing of the guidance or the presence of balconies. It's a direct function of the building being too big. The council have got a financial interest in this development, providing the site effectively for free, and I've been advised by officers that the council will benefit from a share of the rental income. That, to me, would seem to be justification to err on the side of caution when making a planning decision, particularly on matters of amenity and townscape. Your officers and the applicant may tell you that this is the only viable option to retain and reuse the listed building, but presumably they said the same in 2017 when it was 2 floors lower. They may tell you that on balance and on its own merits it's acceptable, but I would suggest that on the amenity impact grounds alone, this scheme shouldn't have made it as far as committee in its current form.
Thank you very much. And we've got Oliver Vicarage, please. Oliver.
Good evening, Councillor. Good evening, Chairs. Good evening, Councillor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Oliver Vicarage, and I'm the Development Manager responsible for the delivery of this project within Castleforge. Haggerston Baths closed its doors in 2000 and has remained derelict ever since. Since its closure, it has been identified on the Historic England's Heritage at Risk Register and is costing Hackney in excess of £100,000 a year for basic maintenance and site security. Intervention is of paramount importance. Our involvement began in 2017 when, through a competitive bidding process and public consultation, Castleforge was selected by Hackney Council and the residents as the preferred partner to bring the Haggerston Baths back into use. Over the past 4 years, we have built on the intentions we set out in our original bid stage proposal to provide a positive community environment centred around flexible office accommodation and respectful of the building's heritage. As part of our proposals, we have engaged with the local community through a series of consultation sessions and standalone meetings. Where possible, we have incorporated their feedback into the scheme and welcome the opportunity to continue that dialogue with the local residents as we move forward to delivering and operating the building. We have collaborated extensively with officers at Hackney Council and Historic England to ensure that our proposals document, respect, and preserve the building's heritage. Conservation, as we see it, is about ensuring a building's relevance today so as to secure its long-term future. The entire building will be operated by our serviced office provider, Clockwise. This new model of flexible workspace responds to the changing work habits and the requirements of agile solutions, increasingly relevant in the wake of the pandemic. Our investment in the building will repair and celebrate the significance of the building, fundamentally reinstating public access. Our desire is to promote appreciation of the building through the introduction of new community cafes and event space in and around the pool hall, which will in turn bring job opportunities to the local community. Discounted workspace and affordable workshops will complement the commercial offer to foster the future of SMEs within the borough. This year, we will be concluding the delivery of several key historic assets within our portfolio. This includes the Grade 2 star listed Generator building in Bristol, which completes this month to mark a new era in the building's 120-year history. In addition, we will complete our work on Bromley Town Hall. This is a Grade 2 listed building which has sat vacant for 5 years. But since acquiring the site in 2018, we have invested over £20 million to bring this building back into use. Both projects evidence the credibility of our intention to deliver this proposal we present to you this evening. We are uniquely positioned to drive positive change to the way people interact with places, making them more valuable for everybody. One of the core drivers is to create places that transform experiences of the built environment, increasing prosperity, productivity, opportunity, and sustainability. As custodians of the Haggerston Baths, we look forward to working with Hackney to deliver this scheme and conserve this important element of the borough's heritage for future generations. The team is on hand if you have any questions regarding your approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I start off? Nick, I wonder if you could, we'll try and address the issue of the across the swimmer's lane. So could you put those, you've got two images, one was a CGI and one was a drawing. I wonder if you could go through those two, because I went down this afternoon to have a look at the site, and I have to say I think there was a larger than 10 meters, I thought, and I recognise what you were saying in the report about the mirroring of this building compared to the other building. There it is. Can you tell me, is that 10 meters then it's being suggested?
The building's not exactly parallel. It's between 13 and 15 meters, depending on where you stand.
Thank you. And can you tell me that the height, this is a 4-storey building on the right?
Yeah.
And it's that's it. So the 4-storey building comes to the top of the 5th story of the new building.
That's right.
Which is itself set back. And I think the argument in your report is that this effectively mirrors the building across the alleyway or the swimmer's lane. Is that right?
That's right. It's not exact mirroring because the boundary is slightly different on each of the buildings. But I think it's important to note that the scale that you're looking at and the new building is not dissimilar to what you've got on the Basement Mill and London Mill apartments. That's true. I think it's also worth noting that the impacts that have been talked about are largely caused by the balconies on these buildings, these existing buildings, and that where there aren't balconies, the daylight, the VSC that would be left is mid-teens, which is commonly found to be acceptable in an inner London location like this. The BRE guidance, of course, is for suburban development, so it is treated with a certain amount of flexibility, and that's natural in inner London locations like this.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions, please?
I wondered if we could hear from the conservation officer.
Okay, we can. In generality?
Yes.
Okay, Tim, tell us what you think about the whole story, please.
Okay. I mean, I've been involved with the building since 2015.
Tim, sorry, could you turn your volume up a bit, please?
Speak up a little bit.
Sorry, is that better?
A little bit, thank you.
It is, if you hold it there, yes.
Yeah. I've been involved with the building since 2015, and it is on the Heritage at Risk Register, and it is in very poor condition indeed. If we look at the harms and then the benefits, it's all in the report. The harms are that part of the building, well, two main parts are demolished. There's a part to the northeast which we're not too worried about because it's in very poor condition. It isn't particularly significant, and it's replaced with a similar volume, which we think is entirely acceptable. The part to the west is mixed. The 1954 element to the northwest, demolishing that part is probably a benefit because it's later and quite detracting. The other part to the west, the ground floor of that element and the first floor of that element are part of the original 1904 building, but they've been really heavily remodeled, and there's very little left there that's of any significance. So we're reasonably content with that. The basement area was more contentious because this building has an odd history where the plant room was abandoned and moved, which left the 1904 boilers and other plant sort of sitting there for probably 50, 60 years. We spent a lot of time trying to reach an agreement, and we came up with a compromise, which is probably a realistic compromise, where that area is demolished after being recorded, and then aspects of the plant are taken out and will be conserved and presented in the foyer of the new office building. We feel that there's some harm in heritage terms in terms of the height and mass of the new build, which we think probably is slightly too tall. During discussions, pre-act discussions, a number of changes were made. The number of floors wasn't reduced, but the floor height was changed on each floor, so the building came down, and the sixth floor was quite heavily set back, so that although it looks quite tall in elevation, elevation isn't real life. In real life, the sixth floor is difficult to actually see from ground level because the surrounding streets are generally quite narrow. So we felt that was an acceptable impact overall. We also felt that the building inside the swimming pool itself, the two-storey pool pavilion, was harmful because obviously it intrudes into the historic volume. Overall, the scheme was welcomed by Historic England, so we have their support. Taken in its totality, we felt that there was less than substantial harm. The sixth floor in particular was considered to be justified by the viability data which was provided, which indicated that the scheme is close to not being viable and is definitely not viable with the sixth floor omitted. And that's dealt with at paragraph 6.4.31. So in terms of relating the harms to the benefits, there's a huge benefit to restoring the building, which is currently in really sad condition. And the whole of the elements which are not demolished will be restored subject to conditions. some elements are actually being reinstated. The building lost its roof lantern over the pool in the war, and that's being reinstated in a modern but better form, which is a big improvement on what's there. And the building has a very lovely gilded ship weather vane, which is no longer very gilded and is not in great shape, and that will be restored, as well as all the rest of the building. The building will have a viable new use. If the plan is implemented, it will be removed from the Heritage at Risk Register. And the scheme obviously provides other benefits, other public benefits, including office space, an event space, a community hall, a gym and a cafe. So our conclusion overall was that although there's less than substantial harm, it was comfortably outweighed by the public benefits of the scheme.
Thank you. Members can, of course, have a look at what is only a partial model. But I wonder, Nick, if you could put the image of the sawtooth side of this building, because that's the big bit that's being demolished, isn't it?
Certainly, let me find it.
I'm trying to orientate myself as to what's the northwest.
Is this the image you're looking at? So
That's
this-
right. So the sawtooth you don't care about at all, Tim, is that right?
No, I think it'd be better without that. That was built in 1954 as a public laundrette.
Okay. And the bluish stuff is of lower value and is in bad condition. Is that your...
Yeah, we didn't really have any issue with the demolition of the ground and first floor of that pale blue stuff, which is part of the 1904 building, but the ground floor was originally partly first-class men's bars and partly laundry, but that's been entirely stripped out internally, and it's now what swimming pool people call a changing village. It's a load of changing rooms from the 1980s, so very little left. The first floor was the second-class men's bars, and that's been completely stripped out for a gym. And it's also worth pointing out that that bit of the building will probably fall down before too long, because it's got some really serious structural issues with some cracks.
Okay, so the brown and the blue bit is being removed and that bit are replaced by this new element. What's the other blue bit? Is that to go, or?
That little bit in the right-hand side there is it's a funny little bit. It's a sort of set of fire exits and a sort of fire escape off the roof. Some of that is from the 20s and is non-original. Some of it's original, but has also got some structural issues. And that area also includes a very decayed sort of service yard, and that's replaced by a slightly similar building, keeping the original entrances at ground level, but allowing for some plant and proper access to the bike storage areas. We didn't have an issue with that.
Thank you. Do members want to have a look at what we've got in terms of the model? Let's have a break for a second then.
Chair, if we're carrying on, I wonder if...
Yes. Okay, so
um,
we're back, Tim. If we could, any questions? Councillor Hanson, please.
No, I was very pleased. I'm very happy to hear what Tim said. That was extremely
Okay.
interesting. I
Next
wondered if we
question.
could ask the case officer to respond to the objectors' points.
Which was mainly the amenity issue of the,
It's the amenity of the people in the houses
Okay.
on the other side of Swimmers Bay.
officer, I thought, okay. Nick, can we run through the objections then that have been talked to this evening regarding the amenity, the outlook and the light issues for the new block opposite?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that already to a certain extent, and there was another question raised, I think, that was about whether the viability discussions have meant that we have not considered the amenity of the Basin Mill and London Mill apartments. And obviously, I'd just like to make clear that amenity is considered entirely separately from any considerations of viability, as we're saying here. In terms of the daylight sunlight, again, we find it acceptable and not untypical for an inner London location. In terms of outlook, we think that the distance is, it should be found acceptable between the new windows of the office and the existing windows of the London Mill and Basement Mill apartments. In terms of outlook and sense of enclosure, I think that it's not unreasonable to expect a building of this scale to be built in the location. Yes, it's a listed building that you've got there at the moment, but I mean, the listed building will not stand for very much longer. And if the listed building didn't stand for very much longer and the new building was to be put on there, we wouldn't find the new building to be unacceptable at the scale at which it's proposed in amenity terms. Would that be sufficient for you, or is there a specific issue that you'd like me to talk about?
No, that's fine, but I think Councillor Young had a related question.
Just sort of following on from that, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. Our objector representing the residents specifically referred to an earlier proposal in 2017. It would be good to have a response directly to that. So the 2017 proposal was 2 floors lower. Why is it that we can't have a 2 floors lower? You're probably going to say because it wouldn't be viable. So it would be good to know why it now wouldn't be viable at 2 floors lower when it was in 2017.
So the story of the roof heights, Nick.
I think in a sense the story of the roof heights is unimportant for this meeting because we're looking at this particular planning proposal, we're assessing it on its own merits. Now the competition and how that was carried out is a matter for the council certainly, but it's not necessarily a matter for this discussion. Personally, I don't know, this was before my time, but there's also a question that that needs to be raised about, as Tim was saying, the floor heights have been lowered. So is it directly comparable, the fact that there was 1 story of extension, but the floor heights are lower, so that setback bit is set back at a lower level, even though it's 2 stories above and then another setback level. So in order to directly compare the two, first of all, you'd need to have a look at the elevations that were proposed at the time or whether those were just sketched up. Secondly, obviously a lot of things have changed since 2017. And so the figures aren't directly comparable, but most of all, we need to consider this.
Hey, Nick, but that's sort of accepted, but Tim said that he really thought that the 6th floor was a bit too much and there was a viability issue. I think that's what it is pertinent, if you could address that. And I don't know if James is here. James is here. If you can, between you, tell us why it must have a height that is a little bit higher than Tim would really like.
First of all, we recognise that we assess the harm to the listed building that comes from that top story. We found that it was a less than substantial harm and acceptably balanced against the public benefits of the renovation and repair. Now, that renovation repair comes with significant costs. We know that. We looked at those costs through the viability process. We saw that the top story It does have a revenue benefit to the developers, and if you were to remove that, then the deliverability of the scheme would be even less than it is at the moment. So that was the process that we went through. But actually, what we were assessing was the harm of against the listed building against the public benefits of the scheme. I think, Tim, are you happy with that? That's essentially where we got to.
Yeah, just make a couple of points just to be clear to the councillor that the 2017 proposals were not planning proposals. So that, I mean, it's up to the chair, but I wouldn't regard them as actually material. So it wasn't a planning application, that was a bid procedure. The point I was making was that if you're going to cause some harm to a listed building, you need a justification. And in the case of the 6th floor, the justification was essentially the viability. And so that then relies on the viability information which has been submitted. And I think perhaps James Carney can talk about the viability.
Hi there, Chair. Yeah, I'm happy to take over here. I mean, it's pretty much as Nick has said, that the scheme's viability to break even is dependent on the 6th floor. On a current day basis, neither the proposed scheme or the kind of alternative scheme with the 6th floor reduced break even. But what the applicant has done in their viability assessment is that they have kind of forecast rental growth for both schemes to see, you know, with a certain amount of growth where they can break if they'll break even. And what the viability process has shown is that the proposed scheme does, partly because that top floor will achieve a premium rent, and that's what they need in there to kind of to get to the break-even point. Whereas the scheme with the reduced massing, that doesn't reach the break-even point. And I mean, as I said, neither are viable on a current day basis, but the applicant is taking an optimistic view on kind of rental growth going forward. And as I understand it, they're prepared to take that view on the proposed scheme, but they wouldn't be prepared to kind of make that commercial decision on the reduced massing scheme, because they wouldn't be able to secure the premium rents that they require on the upper floors.
Thank you. Any more?
That's really helpful to get the viability information. Thank you. I should have declared a bit of an interest because I was a keen swimmer and indeed bather at Haggerston Baths before it shut down. So was very sorry to see it in decay, and I'm very pleased to see it brought back in.
That's not material.
My other question relates to the windows. So there is a better picture, but the one I can find right now is on page 49. Yeah. So the windows of the new block.
Okay. Can we have a picture, Nick?
There is one somewhere. Yeah.
If we can get it on the screen.
So the one there's sort of 4950, but I think there is a better one. I know that the presentation said that these windows are in keeping with the style. Can you tell us a bit more about you know, whether other options were considered for these windows to make them more in keeping with, sort of more similar to the existing style of the windows?
So that's Luciana. If you could put the drawing up, Nick, that would be good.
It's the Thomas Lane.
The CGI, I think we're interested in, perhaps.
Yeah, I found it. Now I just have to get it on the screen. Give me 2 seconds.
I think there's one that's sort of at an angle, but there's also one that's kind of direct
Here we
on.
are. Oh,
There's that one and that one. Is that helpful?
that one will do. Luciana, tell us about the windows. Is she there?
Hi, Councillor Stops. Actually, Tim has been the design officer on this one, so I hope that he can help with the question.
Yeah, I mean, there was a number of discussions between ourselves and Historic England, who are heavily involved in a lot of the pre-app discussions, and the applicants. It's a tricky one in terms of how you design this building, because the rear elevation and the front elevation are hugely ornamental Edwardian buildings with very large steel windows. The existing elevation that's been demolished had some rather feeble 1950s windows in the 1954 bit, and then actually not very many windows at all in the other parts of the existing elevation, and the ones that were there were plastic. We encouraged them to come up with a muted, basically we said to them, it should be one building. It shouldn't be the historic swimming pool with an office building sort of stuck on the end. The idea is it should be one integrated building, and so we worked quite hard to make sure that there was a flow internally between the two parts of the two elements of the building. And we wanted a muted approach that didn't sort of shout new. So we definitely thought that a brown brick that goes with the retained chimney was the way to go. The applicant chose a sort of fairly muted design style for an office use, which I think perhaps we could ask them, is intended to reference elements of the historic building, but also sort of elements of the local sort of scene, which to the north includes Regent's Canal industrial office type buildings. So I think there's a balance there between an office building and something that with a more industrial sort of appearance. And we were entirely happy with the design that's there.
Thank you. Does that conclude your? Thank you. Claire, please.
I know the objector has talked about 52% of those windows failing. And I know your response is that it's appropriate for inner city development. I just think it'd be fair to the objectors if you just gave a bit more of a detailed explanation on that. So why is it failing 52%, and why is it appropriate for inner city development? So can we have a bit of an expansion on that, please?
Certainly. Well, essentially, the BRE asks us to look at the existing features of a building and whether they exacerbate any harm. And one of the features of basement Mill and London Mill apartments is that they've got balconies. Now, balconies are always going to be difficult because they stop a view of the sky sort of by definition when you're underneath them, but they do also provide a amenity benefit. Is why they're built into buildings, despite the fact that they leave the windows behind them with lower VSC than you'd otherwise expect. Now, those windows that don't have a balcony above them have got VSC in the mid-teens, which, while it's low compared to what the BRE guidance says, there's a lot of case law on this, and we commonly make decisions in these planning subcommittee meetings where mid-teens is considered acceptable for buildings that aren't in a suburban context like the BRE guidance suggests, and in an inner London context. Now, so what you talk about when you talk about the BRE targets for suburban development, you can then say that something fails the BRE guidance when in fact what you're talking about is an acceptable development as seen everywhere else apart from BRE guidance, and the BRE guidance is targets for a suburban development. Does that make sense?
Does that give a better explanation?
I think it's also the case that these windows in the new development look towards the windows in the flats look towards the swimming baths. And it can't be the case that because you've got a set of flats here, you can have no development opposite them. So you have to look at what is fair in terms of the developmental of the buildings. And often, and I think it's referenced in here, Nick, we talk about the mirror of the building. If you have a look at the elevations that we saw earlier, you'll see that one building, the flats, is about 4 stories, and the other building is about 4 stories the same, plus a setback there.
Yeah.
And that allows you to be, I think, and I've been down to see it, allows me to consider that though the issue of BRE is strictly correct, I don't think there is the merit that this is is taking huge amounts of light from the flats. So I'm reasonably confident about that. Any more questions? Please, Claire.
So I noticed that you're going to be installing air source heat pumps, and I know, which is great, it's great news, and I hope there's a detailed post-occupancy evaluation, because obviously we're still learning a lot from this kind of technology, that's part of the recommendations. The other point I was just interested, with historic buildings, it's quite difficult, isn't it, to achieve, I mean, I haven't looked in all the detail of all of this area, to achieve the kind of thermal efficiency settings to make air source heat pumps viable. So I don't know whether you can provide a little bit more detail. You may say that's not planning consideration now, Chair, I don't know. But since we're presented with air source heat pumps,
I think
it's
it is
important
interesting.
that we see that it's going to work.
Yeah. Can we? Is there an architect that knows about air source heat pump and where these things are going to go?
Shall I say, just in the meantime, that there is
Okay, Nick, yes, first.
There is a condition, and it's been amended on the basis of some additional recommendations from some independent sustainability advisors that the council's taken on, effectively paid for by the applicant. They suggested that we get more details of the air source heat pumps at the next stage, along with their location, while recommending their use. They'd also like to see, they'd also suggest that we should see further details at the next stage.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just follow on? Can I ask what kind of measures you're taking to make sure that, you know, the building, the historic part plus the new, which is much easier, has a very high thermal efficiency rating? Otherwise, you wouldn't be even considering air source heat pumps. Otherwise, the energy demand would just be too great. So can you explain how the historic element is, you know, is going to be thermally efficient?
Shall we ask the architects? Are you able to?
Yeah. Can
Please.
you hear me? Is that okay? Yeah, we're actually, in terms of the sort of BREEAM assessments, because it's a listed building and we obviously have a new element, we're having to get a bespoke assessment based on the fact that part of it's listed, part of it is new. And so we are targeting a very good, which I know is slightly under what the London plan is for is for excellent, but we will. The new part is actually quite divided from the rest of it in terms of for fire compartmentation, apart from anything. So we can actually upgrade the fabric of that building quite significantly compared to what the heritage elements are. The heritage elements we're going to upgrade as best we can in the areas that we can. But we also have to think about it being a listed building and how far we can take that without it sort of detrimentally affecting, you know, the aesthetics of the building. Is that okay?
So you're suggesting that it's possible the air source heat pumps will provide for the newer, and you would use an alternative source for the older parts?
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of early days, so it's sort of got to be developed technically at the next stage, but that's our target at the moment, yeah.
Will these air source heat pumps be located?
So we have a plant area up on the 5th floor, adjacent to that setback floor.
Okay.
That's fully enclosed, and obviously we'll have to deal with any acoustic issues with plant screens around it. Okay. And there's also an element of plant on the roof of the east wing as well, above the slipper baths. It's mainly because it's sort of the nature of the building is kind of a U shape. So it's impossible to service the entire building from one location without having to straddle the pool hall. So we've got two areas.
Thank you.
Can I just repeat a part of Claire's question, which was, is it possible to have a requirement that post-occupancy surveys are carried out? Or
Nick,
If the applicant's happy for us to add that to the condition that's already been amended in the addendum, I don't see that there'd be any reason not to.
Applicant, are you interested in the post-occupancy issues here for us?
I think we can definitely explore the opportunity. The slight nuance is the fact that this is serviced offices, so it's not going to be occupied at 100% capacity day one, which will mean a typical post-occupancy evaluation would look at how the building functions at full occupancy. We don't know at what point down the line that the building will be at full occupancy, so we can have discussions and see what's feasible, but we can't really commit to anything tonight.
Thank you. We'll ask. So we think we could best endeavours, Nick. Would that be?
Yeah, I'll draw up a condition with as we've already got that relatively detailed condition in, and maybe an additional element to that that's talking about best endeavours for the post-occupancy test.
Okay. Perhaps I'll go through a few of my questions I've got now. So the material, Tim, you're happy that you know what the material is, or should we bring that back to just check we're comfortable with it all?
I think we're happy with the detail that is in the proposals at the moment. There is a condition requiring submission of materials for both the listed building and the new building. So I think we're fairly happy that we can manage that.
Okay.
Chair, does that include signage and external lighting? I was looking for a condition about that, because if not, I'd quite like that to be more detailed.
The signage and external lighting.
It says in the report that the signage proposed is not fully detailed. But
Okay.
I wouldn't wish to see sort of Dalston Library style signage.
Yes.
Bear with me a second, I'll have to have a look.
I think given this is a listed building, we will have the materials back.
Including the
Nick,
signage and external lighting,
and
please.
the signage. So all those important details, like we had with the surgery, could come back to members. I think that would be good.
Just to let you know, the signage is on the detailed design details to the approved condition, which is 8.1.7. So if that's the one that comes back for the other details, then that'll be in there as well.
Thank you. Sorry, could you give me the number again? 8.1.7.
Signage.
It's E.
Yep, found it. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a second question. Why are you removing the boilers? You want the space down there? Is that the essential?
So the boilers are currently contaminated with asbestos. They're contaminated, so we cannot keep them in the building. We have to identify which materials we can remove. We need to be destructive on one of the boilers. The compromise is that we preserve one of the boilers. There, I think, is 3 in the building currently. One of those will be preserved and presented and displayed for people in the building, but the others will be destroyed.
Okay. Nick, you've got 194,000, I think, down there for amenity because there's the issues. That's a huge amount, and I wonder where you think that's going to go. I mean, the issue of the pavement widening strikes me as a good use of that money, and it would keep it on the site.
So this is 194,000 in the heads of terms for the communal space offset. Is that right, or is this?
Yeah, something like that.
Let me just double check the heads of terms, so I'm not lying to you. Give me 2 seconds, because there's quite a few different bits. Obviously, there's a new public works, the cycle parking. That's one, and there's highways work separately. The payment in lieu, the 194,000. Essentially, there is a commitment in the local plan that for office buildings or commercial buildings, 4 meters squared of communal office of open space will be provided. Now, if that's not provided, then within the planning obligations SPD, there's a formula for finding out how much that off-site payment in lieu would be, and that's come to be 194,000. I don't have a particular suggestion at this moment in time in how that's best spent, but obviously there's none being provided on the site at the moment. So any thoughts welcome, but that goes into a pot that's spent elsewhere.
Well, the footways in front of the building are incredibly narrow, and opposite the building, Kazim will know that you've got parked vehicles. I think there's an opportunity to widen those footways, and that should be, we'd like that 194,000 to be associated with the building, not to be used in some other far distant part of the borough somewhere. I don't know whether the developers have got any idea as to where that should be spent, but I think that would be my preference. Kazim, you've put your camera on.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that I think over the last kind of year or so, we've requested that kind of open space payment for street scene to provide open space and or to improve the public realm. So I think that is a good suggestion. I think that's come up a few times during the course of assessing the application. The footways are narrow, so we could explore that as well as just looking at the public realm in the kind of immediate vicinity of the site. I'm sure that's the preference.
Thank you. Sorry, Nick.
Tim will tell you that the reason the footways are narrow there is because they built the building in the wrong place, and it was supposed to be further to the north. So that's a 1904 problem showing its head now.
Yeah, there was an argument between London County Council and the Metropolitan Borough of Shoreditch for 20 years, with the London County Council asking them to demolish the pool because it was 2 feet too far south.
Developers, have you any idea? There's a lot of money there, 194,000. Yeah, handing over.
So I don't think we've discussed or agreed really how that could be spent. We're open to conversation. In terms of ideas, I don't know if there's anybody else on the team that wants to.
Okay, let's not come up with them now. But anyway, that was struck me when I went down there. Right at the front. I think it's just a couple of paving slabs wide, the footways. And one more question for the architect. You're the architect. Have you considered cross-laminated timber for this building, please? Because it's the perfect size for it.
We are actually using it on the new wing. We have a steel structure, but we're using CLT slabs.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. And finally, my question is about what is envisaged in terms of the public use of this building. The pool area is going to be accessed by the public 5 days a week, I think it says. Is that as a cafeteria, or I've no sense of what it's going to be used for?
Shall I speak now? Or Oliver, do you want to speak? It's up to you.
I'm looking at the applicant at the moment, but you can come back in a minute, Nick.
Okay, so the pool hall, the main objective is to open it so it's accessible to the public. We've put uses in that space to activate it and ensure that there are activities that can be done. There's community workshop space and workshop space in the basement, which will be one of the uses. The ground floor of the pool hall and the deck around are free access for people to come in and really use that space as they feel fit.
So I can go and sit in there and have a cup of tea, can I?
Yeah, and we'd welcome it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
If it was to be used as a display space, a museum or something like of that type, would it need a change of use, or would it already be possible to change its use to that?
So the use is proposed as a sui generis use that will be completely defined by the operational management plan that we received. We've already received a draft one, which is one of the approved documents, and that includes things like display of art or ornaments. So that's part of the sui generis use of that internal main pool hall space that you're approving tonight.
There's a yoga room and stuff like that, isn't there?
Yeah, that's separate though. That's in the basement, and we're really talking about. I think we're really talking about the main pool hall now. Yeah.
Okay.
And related point, Chair, will it be possible, maybe this is for the management plan, but will it be possible for people to use the toilets without making a purchase from the cafe?
Good question.
Because that's what we required at Britannia.
Good question, Nick.
If the applicants are happy to put that in the operational plan, management plan, and I'm sure they'll say yes to it.
I think we should have the management
I would
plan
like to
come
ask
back.
them to put this in the plan, please, Chair.
Okay, we'll have that come back, or at least our successors will have to deal with that, Councillor Hanson. Claire, please.
I was just going to ask how the affordable work space would work, you know, where you're going to market it, the kind of tenants you're kind of looking for, and how you're designing the space with that in mind.
So it's worth noting that it's not affordable workspace because we're calling it discounted workspace because it doesn't meet the 40% discount that we look for in the local plan at the moment. Now, we think that's acceptable because essentially that was the amount of discounting that was on offer before the cyber attack, which we would have expected before the cyber attack and in the local plan at the time. And also because of the constraints of the listed building and the cost of it. Now, in terms of how it's going to be used, there is 531 metres squared within the western wing that will be used either as within the office, the private offices, or as the workspaces in terms of the desks. That's going to be part of a discounted workspace strategy. The full details of how they want that to work, a bit of a mix of the two might be helpful, or it might be better just to do one or the other. But the full details that'll come out later. Then obviously you've got the basement maker spaces at the bottom that are discounted by their nature. That's additional to the 531%, which would be the 10% of the floor space, that 531. And then you've got club membership of the various different other spaces, such as the mezzanine desks around the pool hall. And those like club memberships will come at different cost levels as well. So that's how it's been presented at the moment, and it seems a satisfactory offer to us.
Thank you. I think with that, oh no, Sarah?
Will we have the management, will the management plan come back to us?
I'm going to suggest that, yes.
Thank you.
So we know what we're about. What I'm suggesting is that we've got a recommendation to grant planning permission in legal agreement. Isn't it a unilateral undertaking? Is it a legal agreement? It's the council, is it, or what?
Not the council.
There will be a second, okay. So grant planning permission subject to conditions and completion of a legal agreement. Three of those conditions, the management plan, particularly the toilets we're interested in, the materials, and the £194,000, what's going to happen to that?
Can I say the external lighting, Chair, because it's not actually in the condition and the list of things to come back.
Say again?
The external lighting with the
Okay,
signage.
the materials, external lighting and signing.
Signage is in the condition to be agreed, but it doesn't, but external lighting isn't.
Okay.
But I'd
Oh,
add that to
the
the
architectural
same
lighting. Yes, we want to know about the architectural lighting, the chimney, etc., don't we? That's what you're talking about, isn't it? Yeah, sorry. Yes, and perhaps, and the 194,000 would like to know what that's going to be used for. If they could come back, Nick.
The 194,000 is a head of term rather than a condition, so it wouldn't come back in the same way. That'd be something that's decided at a later time.
Okay, but I think it would be, okay. We're going to have, yes, well started. We're going to have a best endeavours condition in terms of the post-occupancy issues. (8.1.12). Anybody spot it quicker than me?
I didn't hear the question on 8.1.12. What was that?
Nick, does 8.1.12 cover the post-occupancy condition issue?
So I'm just scrolling up to it now. It's quite a lot.
Okay, you can add that to it, can't you? So they're saying it's going to be very good. Would like to know whether afterwards it is very good and what the issues are.
You were asking specifically about the air source heat pumps rather than BREEAM in general. So yeah, I mean, we considered that the post-occupancy BREEAM was the standard way to do it. But if you're particularly interested about the air source heat pumps, we can add that to the condition of best endeavours. That doesn't seem to be a problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so with all that, we know what we're doing. All those in favour, please show. That is all of us. Thank you very much indeed. I remember as a cabinet member 20 years ago, we discussed what on earth we were going to do with Haggerston Baths. And Nargis, Councillor Nargis, she was very keen on spas and things, but we couldn't make it stack up. So it's good that it finally looks like it might be on the indeed.
We've lost sound in here.
Decisions are split up by ward, and thank you very much for that. That's great. The other bit is any other business and date of next meetings. Officers are really keen to get 2 more meetings in before the end of March. It is really difficult because we've been scuppered because the full council has moved on to our planning meeting. There's a possibility, the best possibilities at the moment, and the 3rd of March is a problem because it's your branch meetings and some of you want to be there for either your last branch meeting, etc. So we're trying for the 28th of February to move the cabinet forward to 5:30 so we can take over after that. And Phil says yes. So I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. And the 10th of March, we're trying to get a meeting that's not a public meeting moved out of the back there so we can go in there. I understand that, but when I write to you or Gareth writes to you, please, if you can attend the meetings that we're offering, please take them up because I know it's tricky and Sarah might not be at one of them, etc.
Just for a point of clarification, regarding the 10th of March, there's Pensions Committee, Corporate... Oh, right, okay. But just for the 10th of March, there's Pensions Committee in the evening, Corporate Parenting Board. Now, there was some suggestion that one of those 2 that would be the Corporate Parenting Board will be moved to the Assembly Halls, but I was informed this morning there is a Young Hackney Awards ceremony that may be in the Assembly Halls.
We need to move them somewhere else. They can take a private meeting room. And who's the council lead on that? Is it Antoinette?
I don't know, but I'll look into it.
Well,
I'll try my best.
Please tell me and I'll bully them somehow. The other thing is on the 22nd of April, I'm going to have a planning tour. I say I, because I'm going to sort of lead it, helped by the officers. And so if you pencil in the 22nd of April, probably longer than we normally have, but if you can get some time off, that would be great. It'll be in person, pardon? It's a Friday, yes. Probably start at sort of breakfast at 9 o'clock at one of the venues that we've managed to bring into use. A valedictory tour, yes. Where? Across the borough. So somehow we'll have to provide some transport for you. 22nd. It's before, 22nd. Is that okay? Okay, Natalie? You'll be very welcome as well if you want to come and learn a bit about the history of Hackney planning over 20 years.
Is that the formal conclusion of the agenda now, Chair?
That's the formal conclusion. Yeah, so if I write to you, it's not because I want at least 3 people in the room. I'm sorry if you can't make it. but we've got some really important items that the officers want to get through before the election.
No, obviously you've indicated 28th of February and the 10th of March. I think the 28th of February is, okay, fine. No, that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, officers.